Hi, my name is Kristin. This is Kristin Kraves Books. So, one of my goals for 2022 is to read more backlist titles from my favorite authors. I fall in love with these authors. I read a couple of their books, but I don't explore their backlist. It's very rare that I do that. There are some authors that I've done that for and I can do a separate video on, but I'm thinking Matt Haig, Tiffany D. Jackson, Emma Donoghue, but it's very, very rare for me. And I was looking at my 2021 stats and I had very few repeat authors. I think I read 3 Matt Haig books, and that was the most repeat by an author that I read last year, which is sad because I fall in love with an author. I love their writing. Why don't I explore more of their backlist, knowing that there's a high chance I'm gonna love them? So I put together a stack of authors who I love, who I want to explore more from, and there are more that I could have done, but these are the priorities for 2022, and if I can get through a good chunk of these this year, I will be thrilled. So we're starting off with the author of my favorite book of all time. It competes with another book in this stack actually, but I always kick myself for not having read more from this author because of how much I love the writing in this book. This is The Lonely Hearts Hotel by Heather ONeill. Heather ONeill is actually a Canadian author, which is another goal of mine. I'd love to read more books by Canadians this year. And this is a story that is set in Montreal and follows 2 orphans who really go through it. We follow them through their entire lives as babies, children, teenagers. They have a romantic relationship. They separate and lead very different paths. It gets very, very dark. There's actually a circus in here that goes to New York, which I think would appeal to a lot of people. It's so atmospheric. The writing is lush. These characters are people I still think about, so I just can't believe I haven't read more from Heather ONeill. But as soon as I read this, I went out and bought 2 more of her books. And the first one is The Girl Who Was Saturday Night, and this was actually a finalist for the Giller Prize, which is a book prize here in Canada that I should follow more. The only thing I know about this is that it follows twins, and I think they are famous. And I'm always here for twins, and I don't know, I love the cat on here. It's Heather ONeill. I really want to read this. I haven't heard anybody talk about it, so if you have read this, let me know what you thought. And then the next one is Lullabies for Little Criminals, and actually I started this, I only got 20 pages in, but it was right at the start of the pandemic. I was absolutely loving this, connected with the writing right away. I cried already in those 20 pages, but it was so just deeply emotional and upsetting. We're following a young girl who's, I believe her mother has passed away, and she's living with her father in a, this is set in Montreal as well, and she is being neglected, and it's just so harrowing in that first 20 pages, and I just was not in the right mindset, but I think I'm ready to pick this one up again and fall in love with it. So that is high priority. I will probably start with this one. Then there are 2 more books by Heather ONeill that I would like to get to that I do not own, and one is called Daydreams of Angels. Honestly, this cover appeals to me. I know nothing about it, but that's really the fact with all these authors and their books. I want to read everything despite the premise because I know I like the writing. And then Heather ONeill has a book coming out in February, and it's When We Lost Our Heads, and I'm really excited about that one, so hopefully I can get to at least one before that one comes out because I want to read that one as soon as it comes out. And then we have another Canadian author who I love, and that is Miriam Toews, and her 2 books that I've read by her, this is the first one I read by her, and it's Women Talking. I was actually sent a copy of this from Penguin, I believe, a finished copy, which was so nice, and I'm so glad that they sent this to me because I don't know if I ever would have explored her work otherwise. And this is such a beautiful book. It is based on a true story, and Miriam Toews is from a Mennonite community, so she has some insight into that world. And this follows women at a Mennonite community who are being abused by their husbands, and they are having a meeting talking about their next move because they are so isolated. It would be hard for them to leave, but it's also hard for them to stay, and really it's just their conversation and making a decision, and I thought it was really beautiful. Then the other book I read by her is All My Puny Sorrows, and this is set in, I think it's Calgary and then in Toronto, and it's a story about sisterhood and complicated relationships between sisters and what we will put up with and what we won't, and I thought it was really moving, and I just really like the way that Miriam Toews writes her characters. They're very memorable. And then there are also 2 books by her that I don't own that I want to read. And the first one is A Complicated Kindness. Don't know anything about it, but it's been on my radar for years. And then Fight Night, which is a book that just came out last year and I'm kicking myself for not having read or grabbed a copy of. And this is a story between a grandmother and her granddaughter. I think the granddaughter is suspended and the grandmother agrees to take over her education, and they write letters to each other, and I've heard it's beautiful. And people who haven't read Miriam Toews before have picked this up and loved it, and I'm highly, highly looking forward to that one. And then I find this strange, I don't own any of the Frederick Bachman books that I have read. I think I lent A Man Called Ove out, and I need to buy another copy as that goes. And then the other one I read was Anxious People, but I listened to that on audiobook, which I highly recommend. I think anybody who's read Frederick Bachman knows why I love him so much. A Man Called Ove is one of my most recommended books. That's why I'm missing it, because I lend it out to everybody, because I think it's an easy one to recommend and people will fall in love with Ove so quickly. He's a character who has lost his wife. He's become a bit of a curmudgeon, and he forms a friendship with his younger neighbor, and it's just so beautiful. It's such a great book. And then Anxious People, has that recently been adapted? I'm gonna have to watch that if that's out already, but it is about a heist gone wrong, but it's very character driven, surprisingly moving. I really, really liked it. I know that gets mixed reviews, but I think on audio it was fantastic. And then I want to read everything by him. So Beartown, I do own a copy of somewhere, but I know that that's a heavier one. It is following a sexual assault, and then the town is divided because it was committed by somebody who is a really good hockey player, and hockey means everything to this town. And I know that's been adapted as well, and there are a few books in that series. And then the one I do own and haven't read, I've owned this for years, so I don't know what's wrong with me. I bought this at Costco a long time ago. And this is Britt Marie was here. I don't know what it's about, but it's Frederick Bachman, and he's got a few that kind of look like this. I wrote them down, and every morning the way home gets longer and longer. I've heard incredible things. I think this is a lot of people's favorite Bachman. And then my grandmother asked me to tell you she's sorry, and I think that's about a granddaughter apologizing for her grandmother, leaving notes or something. I just want to read them all. He's great at writing characters, and it really gets you in the feels. I'm sensing a theme from all my favorite authors. I know this about myself, that I am such a character-driven reader. I need to feel a connection to these characters for them to become all-time favorites, and that is true for all these authors so far. And then an author I discovered in 2021 was Zoraida Cordova. The Inheritance of Arcadia Divina was one of my favorite books of last year. Completely took me by surprise. I know that I love magical realism, and this really reminded me why. And I think this is Zoraida Cordova's first adult novel, and all her others are YA. I'm curious to explore more of those. But this is a magical realism. Arcadia Divina is a witch, but really at the heart, this is a family saga. She is dying, and she invites her family to come say goodbye to her, and they have very complicated relationships, and we get into her history. It's just so well done. I actually want to reread this one at some point this year as well, because I listened to the audiobook, but I kind of want to read it physically and tab it because I just thought it was so beautiful. So she has a couple of series that I want to read. The first series is called Labyrinth Lost. I don't hear many people talk about this one, but if you have read it, let me know. It does have good reviews on Goodreads. And then Incendiary is the second one, and I remember seeing this one around when it came out, and I think she has a few other series. So if you are a big Zoraida Cordova fan, please give me recommendations, because I was so surprised by just how much I love this, and I think she was my favorite author discovery of 2021. And then another author I don't own any books from is S.A. Cosby. He wrote Razorblade Tears, which is my all-time favorite thriller, I think, and a must listen. If you are into audiobooks, you have to listen to that on audiobook. And it follows two characters whose sons were married to one another, and one was black and one was white, and the fathers have always had complicated relationships with their sons, but when their sons are murdered, these two men come together to seek vengeance, and it's very violent, but it's so well done. I cried my eyes out at the end, just loved it. And then I know that S.A. Cosby has, I think this was his debut, Blacktop Wasteland, and I don't know anything about it, but I'm going to listen to an audiobook, and I just know that I'm going to love it. So I think I really want to get to that one soon. It's really calling to me. But I would also love to own his books, because I just love them so much, and I actually want to lend them to some people, because I think a lot of the readers that I do have in my life are thriller fans, and I think they're going to love that because it's something different. And then we have N.K. Jemisin. I actually got this box set for Christmas in 2019. It was 2019, because I read 5th Season, and it was my favorite book of 2020. And then I haven't continued with the series, which is just my pattern. That is what I do. And I said last year I wanted to finish a series, and I didn't, so this is the year. So I need to still read The Obelisk Gate and Stone Sky. But I did read her short story, and it was like an Amazon publishing collection. It was called Emergency Skin, and that was my introduction into N.K. Jemisin's writing, and I think that's a good way to go about it. So if you're curious about N.K. Jemisin, but this series intimidates you, I would try that first and see if you can connect with her writing. But this is an intimidating series. It takes a lot of brain power for me to get through the 5th season, but I absolutely loved it. I've never been so shocked in my entire life. It was beautiful, and nobody creates worlds like she does. I don't know how she does it. She's a master. So I also want to read The City We Became. I have an audiobook of that. I know it's kind of a weird concept where cities have personalities. I know the boroughs in New York, so I think Brooklyn, Manhattan, they're all characters. So I'm curious how that all plays out, and I know that she's working on the 2nd book. And she has quite a few series as well, so I also want to read The Killing Moon. And if I can get to those this year, I'll be happy, and then maybe I'll explore more of her work in 2023 because it's just too much, but I adore her. And then the author of my other favorite book of all time, and that is Never Let Me Go by Kazuya Shiguru. I talk about this book constantly. It is the book that made me realize that I love sci-fi. I love sci-fi about clones or AIs, especially if we explore the ethical things behind that and the moral dilemmas that come with that. I thought this was so harrowing and jaw-dropping. I really didn't see a lot of this coming, and it is just so fantastic. I highly recommend this. And then in the same vein as that, I really loved Clara and the Sun. It was one of my best books of 2021. Again, we're following an AI in here who, her name is Clara, and she's an artificial friend for a young girl, and really it's just about her experience there, and I thought the ending was so bittersweet. I really loved that. And then something really different from those two is The Remains of the Day, and this is just following a butler talking about his experience. He's reflecting on his life, and I thought it was fantastic. I also watched the movie, and it's got Anthony Hopkins and Emma Thompson. It was a little slow, but so was the book, and I love them both. So if you don't want to read this book because it is a slower paced book, I highly recommend the movie. And actually I liked the movie for Never Let Me Go as well, with Keira Knightley, is it Andrew Garfield, and I forget her name, but she was great too. She's the one that always reminds me of Michelle Williams, Carrie something. Anyways, watch that movie. It is really good as well. So I never know where to go next with Kazuya Shiguru. I know he's got a huge backlist, but there are 2 that stood out for me. But I would love your advice on this. If you're a fan of his or if you've read some of his backlist, I need direction on this one. So I have The Buried Giant and When We Were Orphans that I'm interested in, but there are a lot to choose from, and he's been writing for decades, so I would love any recommendations or insight into his work. Okay, 2 more authors and then we can wrap this up. I could go on, but Akemi Don Bowman. Starfish is a YA contemporary novel that really surprised me. If you are not normally a contemporary YA fan, I still recommend this one because I think it gets into a lot of interesting conversations. The writing is fantastic. It's hard-hitting, but there's great relationships. I love any books that talk about art and the healing power of art, and that is truly what this is about. We're following a young girl who has a complicated relationship with her mother, and it's just beautiful. And then the other Akemi Don Bowman book that I read is completely different. It is a dystopian sci-fi kind of thing, and it's called The Infinity Course, and that came out last year, and it's the first in a series. And it is such an interesting premise where after you pass away, you end up in this kind of purgatory that somebody like Siri or Alexa has taken over because she's getting revenge on the way that humans treated her in the real world, which sounds ridiculous, but it works. The last quarter really shocked me. So the sequel to that comes out this year, and I will be reading it. That is The Genesis Wars. And she has 2 more contemporaries that I want to read, Summerbird Blue and The Harley Sky. So I really love her writing, and I'm excited that she is exploring different genres. I love when authors do that. And last but certainly not least is Maggie O'Farrell. And actually I have a fiction and a non-fiction from her, and they're 2 of my favorite books ever. And the first one is Hamnet. In Canada, they called it Hamnet and Judith, and I have no idea why. And I don't think this cover is as pretty as everybody else's versions, but in my mind this is Hamnet. And this is a fictionalized story of Shakespeare's son Hamnet and his death. That's not a spoiler, that's really what this book is about. And William Shakespeare's name is never mentioned in here, which I really loved. And it's really about his wife and his wife's grief. And it's so moving. There's something about Maggie O'Farrell's writing that just works. I know this is a lot of people's favorite book, and I can see why it's fantastic, deserves all the hype that it gets. And then her memoir is what introduced me to her writing, and I absolutely love this. This is I Am, 17 Brushes with Death. So she tells her story through her 17 brushes with death, and some are more serious than others, and some are very serious. And I just thought that was such an interesting way to tell her story, and I loved it. And the last chapter really moved me. I cried. It was beautiful. So I don't know where to go next with Maggie O'Farrell either. She has quite an extensive backlist, but people don't talk about her other books besides these two. So if you have read her stuff, I would love to know your favorites, but there are a couple that caught my eye, so let me pull these up. This Must Be the Place. Don't know what it's about, but the cover caught my eye. It had decent reviews. And then Instructions for a Heat Wave. I feel like I did hear a little bit about that when it came out, or maybe was it Simon from Savage Reads was talking about it. I know somebody really liked that one. So it was already on my Goodreads TBR when I was putting this together. So I would love your advice about Maggie O'Farrell as well. So again, if you have any advice of where to go to with Kazuya Shiguru or Maggie O'Farrell or Zoraida Cordova or any of these authors, I would love to hear about it. And I would love to know if you are better than me at exploring the backlist of some of your favorite authors, because it is really something I want to prioritize from here on out. So thanks for watching and liking and subscribing. I appreciate you all so much. Bye for now.